Save this gold.
Hello, welcome to Live from America podcast. This is Hatem alongside me, my good friend, the one and only Noam Dworman, owner of the Comedy Cellar. Hello, Noam.
Hello, Hatem.
The very funny, the comedian Boris Khaykin. Hello, Boris.
Hello, hello.
Always great to see you. And the return of one of my
Likewise.
good friends, long time. It's been a while. Nico Perrino. He is the executive vice president of FIRE, the Foundation of Individual Rights and Expression, host of so to speak, the Free Speech podcast. And he's here. Hello, Nico.
Good to be here. You didn't introduce me by saying that I'm also hilarious,
Well,
but I
you
guess
are,
we can
man.
leave that to the listeners to decide for themselves.
We talk about so much like real shit that I forgot that you're really funny because we talk about politics all the time when we see each other.
I'm
But
not actually sure I'm all that funny, although I did take the Comedy Cellar stand-up comedy course, which was an amazing experience. And I do a lot of writing, and I'm working on a book right now. And taking that stand-up comedy course made me a better writer too, probably more than anything else I've done to learn to become a better writer.
Wow. So first of all, that's Rick Chrome does that course, right?
Yes.
And as opposed to, just if anybody's listening, most comedy club courses, I understand it, are just like really like Trump University type outfits where they just sign people up and they take people's money. But Rick is really a dedicated, like sometimes I see him behind the scenes, like just sweating what to say, what to do, preparing lessons. He is really, and he really knows his stuff. And every single person I meet who takes that course has some anecdote like that about how they benefited from that course. So I'm very proud that he does it there. It's his thing. We're not involved in it, but I'm very proud. And I'm going to make sure that he hears that kind of what do you call it when you testimonial, because it'll make him happy.
I
Well,
had I had few of my friends' girls that joined the also Rick, and he's they swear by his class. Not only that, he, like you said, he really cares. He check on them from time to time. He want to make sure that they actually do good. So good
No,
for.
he's not fly by night. He's very serious about it, and he's really good at it.
So no,
Yeah, he makes
you're in
your jokes
Italy.
tight and
Yeah.
he's fantastic.
I mean, he's respected by. I don't know if anybody saw that. Did you see it, Nico? There's a YouTube documentary. I mean, it wasn't made for YouTube. It's on YouTube. It's called Oh Rick, OH Rick, and it's a documentary about Rick Chrome from the beginning of his career. And many of the most famous comedians in the world are on that documentary talking about how talented Rick was and how he influenced them, and how he influenced them. I mean, he's a very respected guy in
I
comedy.
think that first came out when I was taking his class or around that same time, and I saw it at the IFC Theater just down the road there.
Yes.
And it wasn't available for a long time because they had a hard time getting the rights, I believe, to some of the footage, which comes from archives. I've made a documentary, the amount of money you spend on archival footage. For me and my documentary, it was $80 a second for footage that didn't include talent. And it was $160 a second for footage that did include talent. This is from the major network. So I can only imagine if you're an independent filmmaker with doesn't have an institution behind you, in order to get rights to release your documentary all world in perpetuity, it's just
Well,
So
Nico.
now you're saying it's on YouTube, but
But
that's
it's on
great.
YouTube, and I'll tell you something even worse about that. And this actually is in your bailiwick, or what do they call it now? Your
My
what's that?
backyard.
There's an expression now for when it's something like it. Um,
Your wheelhouse.
your wheelhouse.
There we go.
When whatever that means. When that documentary first came out, it came out almost at the identical time that the shit hit the fan with Louis C.K.
Mm.
And Louis C.K. was in the documentary. And this became not hugely, but he was one of the comedians interviewed, and this became hugely controversial. And they wanted Dustin to cut out the references to the parts with Louis C.K. And at the IFC, prior to the screening, a woman came out, a live woman came out, and apologized, kind of gave a trigger warning to the audience. We just want you to know that Louis C.K. will be appearing in this documentary in case anybody needs to leave. I mean, it was such a fucking moral panic. Anyway, so
Wow.
that was a headwind for them for getting that documentary off the ground. Anyway,
But now it's available, you're saying?
it's on YouTube. Yeah, it has been for a couple
Yeah,
years.
it's a great documentary.
Oh, Rick, everybody should watch it. It's fantastic.
Rick Chrome, shout out. Noam, you were in Italy. You're telling us about the husband chair. What's a husband chair?
Oh, we went to Lake Como, and then we drove to Milan for a few days. I was saying, I sat in all the great husband chairs at all the great designer stores in Milan. They bring you coffee, and you sit there with the bags, and you just wait for your wife, and they treat you very nicely. I was telling Boris, like, you never know, like, how you feel, because if she buys something, well, it's the other way. If she doesn't buy anything, you feel like you wasted your whole afternoon sitting there, right? And if she buys something, it costs you thousands of dollars. So like you just don't know which you prefer. But it's excruciating. Shopping with women. I mean, I don't know. Is it still allowed to? Is the world changed so much you can't say that? But shopping with women, this is grueling.
What do you think of Milan though?
Milan was nice. You know, it didn't blow me away. Like I'd been to Tokyo and Osaka a couple weeks earlier. I've been to other cities. It's a nice urban city. You know, it wasn't my favorite place like in Rome. But what do you think of Milan?
I've never actually been.
Oh,
My family's from Bari, Italy, so we're Southern Italians. They don't like us up north.
Oh yeah.
But
the food was good.
Yeah.
It was good. The hotel was nice. It was fun. I'd recommend it. But the shopping, you know, we got to talk about stuff. But Scott Adams, who I know is a controversial figure, but his books are excellent. I recommend his books. And his most recent book, Reframe Your Brain. Did you read it, Boris?
No, I haven't.
Have you read any of his books? Winning
I haven't,
Big.
no.
They're very, very good. And,
I mean, I've read Dilbert.
Which one? Dilbert.
Dilbert?
So in the beginning of the book, he says that, you know, he used to walk his dog, and he used to like get exasperated. The dog's not going to the bathroom, walking here, walking there. Sometimes the dog doesn't go, and he just like, fuck this, I can't take it anymore. And then he read somewhere that when you take a dog out, it's exhilarating because it's smelling the scents and the urine, and it's just the happiest thing you can make. A dog can never be happier than when it's walking around and experiencing all these smells. And now Scott Adams says, so now when I take the dog out, I think to myself, I'm taking my dog out to smell the urine. It's going to be so awesome for him. He's going to be so happy. It's not about the defecation. This actually changed my attitude on marriage, because now, like, was one time my wife decided one day that our dining room had to go it had to go east-west instead of north-south as it has for a number of years. You know, it's going to cost a lot of money to fix it. Normally I go crazy. Who the fuck would spend tens of thousands of dollars to move it? And I say, oh, she's smelling the urine. It's the process. She loves it. And I was like, makes her happy. It's not about the money. It's not about the end result. It's the process. And that's my attitude about shopping now. I used to think, what are you spending 5 hours? You don't even buy anything. When women go shopping, they're smelling the urine. There's something about that we can't identify with. But this just makes her happy. I can't explain it. It doesn't make me happy. And literally that was going through my head as I'm sitting there. I'm saying, stop thinking that way. She's ecstatic. She loves it. So that's how
did she respond to that analogy, Noam?
She doesn't. I mean, I told her that. Of course, you know, mouse. She didn't like it, but she couldn't actually deny it.
It's a great time to get into Twitter arguments too, while you're sitting in that husband chair, just going at it.
Read Scott Adams' Reframe Your Brain, or I think it's Win Bigly. It's very good. This guy, it's very, very good. Very good. Anyway.
All right, let's start the fight. Free speech. Yes.
We're all for it, aren't we?
I don't know. Let's see.
Of course. So, first, why did Fire change the name?
Because for 23 years of our history, we were founded in 1999. We focused just on college campuses, doing a broad swath of civil liberties work. So due process, academic freedom, free speech, and free press, religious liberty work. And then in 2022, we decided to expand our free speech mission off of college campuses and work across America in many different domains to defend the free speech rights of everyone. So we've been doing that now for 2 years. It's gone pretty well. We decided that we would have 30 simultaneous litigation matters by the end of this year, and we reached that within a year. So we underestimated the market that would exist for our work, and we've almost doubled in size in the last 3 or 4 years. We're now 118 people. And yeah, so we changed the name from Foundation for Individual Rights in Education to Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, right? Because we're no longer just in education. You need to change it. And so we did, but we managed to keep the FIRE acronym. There was a moment there where it was like, should we change it to Foundation for Individual Rights Everywhere and have that be the E?
That's not bad either.
No, it's not bad either, but we're just in the United States and we're not interstellar yet. So maybe down the road.
You can say Foundation for Individual Rights. What about the E? It's a silent E.
Yeah, fur, yeah.
And by the way, we should tell the story. We should tell the story of a club owner who first came across this organization, I don't know, 2015 or something like that.
When we were making the documentary, Can We Take a Joke? We came to your club.
Oh, yeah, right. That's how you, and I identified that of course, I've said a lot of things that didn't turn out right since that, but this one, I said that the ACLU was dying, was discredited, and I think I remember saying to Greg, you guys are going to fill the mantle of the ACLU. The ACLU is gone, and then sure enough, later on, you brought Ira Glasser down, and that's really so.
Ira Glasser, for those who don't know him, is the former executive director of the ACLU, was there for 23 years, took over in the wake of the Skokie case, which I'm surprised more people don't know about. I go into audiences now and maybe like a quarter of people raise their hands, but this is the case where neo-Nazis wanted to rally in a town of Holocaust survivors, about 6,000 Holocaust survivors, and the ACLU came to their defense. And the leadership of the ACLU at the time were mostly Jewish. So you had David Goldberger, who was the lead attorney, a Jewish man. Aryeh Nair was the head of the ACLU, the executive director at the time, himself a Holocaust survivor. And then you had Ira Glasser, who was the head of the New York Civil Liberties Union before taking over for Aryeh. And the New York Civil Liberties Union had the most Jewish members. And so he spent a lot of time in synagogues making the argument. And the thing that's unique about FIRE's mission, and I think one of the reasons that a lot of people came to us to expand off campus, is that unlike the ACLU or some other free speech groups, we just call balls and strikes. We don't have any other issues. And if speech is protected, we defend it. There's no throat clearing. There's no genuflecting before other values. We don't comment on the speech that we defend. We won't say this is bigoted or hateful or offensive or sexist before we defend it. We'll just go out and defend it. It's harder to do when you're an organization like the ACLU and you have 19 different issue areas, some of which are impacted by some of the things that people might say in exercising their First Amendment rights. So in the free speech world, it is a benefit, if you want to remain principled, to have a narrow focus. And I think that's why people focused on FIRE, because we did have that narrow focus and we had this long-standing commitment not to editorialize on the speech that we're defending. Now that means that we lose a lot of donors. We lose a lot of supporters. We can talk about everything post-October 7th, but the tensions are always high on campus in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Like, one of the first things I said to our staff is, we don't want to play politics in this conflict. We want to just call balls and strikes on the free speech stuff. So that comes down to even like little things that we do in our messaging, like don't use the word Palestine. It's not an internationally recognized state, or at least the State Department doesn't recognize it as such. And we don't want people to think that we're making a political statement by calling it the Israel-Palestine conflict. So we're very careful in how we navigate this to try and remain just on the side of calling balls and strikes on the First Amendment and not editorializing on the speech that we're defending.
So what is free speech, in your opinion? Anybody can say anything?
Well, no, and that's the interesting thing, right? Is so the First Amendment is I think 43 words, something like that, and it says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. But what does the freedom of speech mean? What does that entail? For most of American history, it meant very little. Up until 1931, the Supreme Court did not strike down a single speech restriction from the government on First Amendment grounds. So you had abolitionists, pro-labor organizers, pro-union organizers, all getting censored left, right, and center for things that they would say and things that today we would think would be protected by the First Amendment. And then fast forward to 2019, and the First Amendment is the most highly regarded right, particularly the right to free speech, that Americans have. If you ask them what's their most cherished right, they'll say free speech above even the right to vote. So there was essentially a 100-year period, which scholars call the free speech century, where America started to determine for itself what free expression meant. And the exceptions to this that the Supreme Court has articulated, and I generally agree with, are things like true threats, incitement to imminent lawless action, fraud. Now, these are things that are very carefully and narrowly defined. They have a high bar to meet First Amendment exceptions, but I think are generally right. The First Amendment jurisprudence is, I think, the broadest and most thoughtful meditation on what it means to have free speech in a free society, taking into account all the various considerations and tensions. But you're right, Hatem, it's something that's widely debated, and the United States stands alone in our interpretation of it. So it's not the only one.
Boris, what's your thoughts? What is free speech? And by the way, free speech invented in the Middle East, by the way.
Well, is that so?
You want to go? You want to go first, Boris? I like to go. I like to go last, so I can tell you where you're wrong.
I actually have, I wrote a thing all about this for Fire for you guys. I've done a bunch of sketches.
Yep.
But on
some of my favorite, sketches of Fire.
The yelling fire in a crowded theater specific example, which is all over I was going to ask, actually, do you think the Cold War had an increase in terms of like almost a counterculture where there was a greater and stronger defense of free speech because of the increase of attacks on free speech during that period?
Well, particularly among the left, yeah, because you had the Red Scare, and that mostly targeted people on the left. And to be clear about the Red Scare, I mean, there were Soviet spies in the United States. It's not like it was total moral panic or scaremongering, but it did go overboard. And the early free speech movement, the reason that the ACLU grew out of earlier movements like the Free Speech League and the Civil Liberties Bureau is because of restrictions placed on pro-labor organizers who wanted to picket and whatnot. So the free speech movement for the early part of the 20th century into 1990s, when you get the rise of political correctness on college campuses, was mainly a left-wing movement. So that's where you saw most of its advocates. Now you see more people advocating for free speech, at least in theory, if not in practice, on the right. And there's not a huge, and it's not really a cash cow on the left, right? Like left-leaning foundations are not, unfortunately, investing in free speech as much as right-leaning foundations or apolitical ones are.
And Boris, don't avoid the question, what's free speech? So Noam can go next.
Well, my understanding is that for starters, it is, like you said, the government not impeding on your ability to speak freely. So, you have all these gray areas where I'm not a legal expert, but you've got private organizations. You've got whether those private organizations are getting pressure from a public organization, which I feel like is today kind of a big one. You have everything going on Facebook and Twitter and whatnot. So yeah, there's probably a gray area somewhere in there. I'm not exactly sure where one begins and ends. So I bet Noam could educate us on those aspects of it.
What was the last thing you said? Not sure.
In terms of the gray area where you have private organizations like Facebook and Twitter, and they can choose what to censor if they choose to censor, and then you also have pressure from the government. There's probably some specific area where it crosses over into like, I don't know, a quid pro quo type of deal or something, except with a stick rather than a carrot.
So my look, I'm struggling with. I'm getting a Nico knows I invited him. I don't know if he can come. I'm getting an award, but from a competing free speech organization. Fire didn't give me an award from the national.
We don't give many awards.
This one doesn't either. No, the National Coalition Against Censorship. They're giving me a kind of free speech award. So I have to work on some remarks. And I've been thinking a lot about this. And Nico and I actually had an argument a couple months ago in person. Free speech to me is two things. One, it's a matter of human dignity, that you should be able to think and say whatever you want. That's a little flaky, but I think many of us do believe that it's the essence of freedom is to be able to have to be free to say whatever you and do whatever you want, as long as it doesn't cross certain lines that we agree to. But the other thing, and this is where I'm really worried, is that I think free speech was devised because the smartest people in the world, like John Stuart Mill, understood that truth is the most important thing there is to human progress, and only with free speech will you get truth. And what was it, On Liberty? Is that what it's called? You guys print out. Everybody
Yeah,
should,
it's chapter 2 of On Liberty. He's a utilitarian, so the book is broader than free speech, but chapter 2 is held up to be the magnum opus argument for freedom of speech.
Everybody should read that, and it's very convincing, and I still believe it. And for many years, it worked. I am worried that it's not working now. That the way technology is working now, that the marketplace of ideas is not actually functioning such that the people who oppose free speech have a point. And I'm afraid that if we in the free speech community don't adjust to this in some way, they will win the argument. So in the same way that civil libertarians like me are very really believe that people should be considered innocent until proven guilty. But if these knuckleheads just do bail reform and people just start getting sliced up left and right, then that's going to put the idea that people are innocent proven guilty into danger, because people are going to say, listen, that sounds great in theory, but we're getting murdered by these innocent people. So when you saw during COVID and so many things, this disparity of outlandish untruths just outpacing the truth, such, in the 70s or 80s, we just wouldn't have half the country or a quarter of the country afraid to take the COVID vaccine, and huge numbers of a political party believing it kills you. And for whatever reason, it ain't working. And then you add to that the fact that, the internet is forever, and privacy is valued, and somebody takes a snapshot of you and they put it up on the internet, and it's there for your great grandchildren are going to see it. And used to be you had a paper, and I've said this before, you had an evening paper, and it would go in the waste paper basket. So whatever was in there, it was quickly forgotten unless you wanted to go get microfiche or whatever it is. And even then you couldn't control F and find anything in an evening paper, and it wasn't even easy to spread it. So in some way, the rampant spread of conspiracy theories, which have now jumped the barrier from the checkout aisle of the supermarket, where everybody knew the Weekly World News was basically an entertainment product, to Tucker Carlson sitting, one seat away from the president, and then the vice presidential candidate praising Alex Jones, and just the total corruption of especially the Republicans and the right of conspiracy theories. And I haven't formulated how is this going to turn around, and will it, when people are dropping dead from it. And I'll just say one other thing. It also, this is where Nico and I had our argument, like when Israel happened, all of a sudden the college presidents started embracing free speech. And I got mad. I was like, yeah, I'm happy they're embracing free speech, but why are we letting them pretend they care about free speech? They're only embracing free speech because finally it serves their agenda. And tomorrow they'll find excuses to shit on free speech again when it's the pro-life movement that wants to shut down the campus. And I feel like we're giving them credit when actually they're playing us. So all of this is going into a kind of a cauldron that I'm thinking with. I want to make some remarks about it. And I'm just afraid that if we in the free speech community don't give serious thought to what measures as a society we can take to improve the workings of the marketplace of ideas, whether it means teaching children how to determine what's true and what's not true on the internet, a movement towards requiring as a social norm sourcing of every fact that is said on TV or on articles, or like community notes was a good breakthrough on Twitter, but whatever in that vein that can happen. I'm afraid that the people who don't really give a shit about free speech are just going to get a critical mass of evidence of saying, listen, dudes, people are dropping dead from vaccines they don't trust. People are, we're going to have to, and I'm getting to the kicker, we're going to have to revise this free speech stuff, because after all, if Madison had this world, you think he would have passed that exact same First Amendment? And by the way, you conservatives, you're all about originalist interpretations. Well, let's do an originalist interpretation of the First Amendment, right? Okay, you win the argument. We're all originalists now. And by the way, the originalist interpretation of the First Amendment does not say what you say it says. So we're going to start rolling it back. This is what I'm afraid is happening. What's that?
I think this is all still relatively new. And like the community notes is a great example, but I think like also the mental equivalent in society of community notes, like people are going to be inoculated from a lot of this stuff. I feel like somebody 10 years younger than me has a better smell for bullshit with certain things, and I have a better smell for bullshit than my dad with certain things.
Not Hatem.
Well, October 7th happened, and like you said, like some of these places revealed themselves to be hypocrites. I don't think the optimistic side of that is it might not be that easy for them to put the genie back in the bottle. Like they're now on the record as pro free speech. Some of them have like fired DEI departments since because I'm sure this had an effect on it.
Well, I said a quick two things about free speech, and then we go to, what happens.
Nico was taking notes. I know he wants to respond.
Yeah, I've got a lot to say. But...
but I wanted to say two things. First, free speech is, your ability to say whatever you want, regardless of the cause. There's not certain causes that it's okay. Now, if we talk about Palestine, no, all of a sudden, no, it's not free speech.
Noam switched his whole free speech views.
Yeah.
No, that's not true. I just, for the record, the day that they started blacklisting people, the day that they fired people, I was on Twitter saying, don't fire these people, don't blacklist them.
True.
I stood up for Rainer Workman, was that her name? The girl who signed the woman who signed the NYU law students thing and then got unhired from a job. I'm 100% on the side of that. I did not change my position at all. What I'm saying is that the university presidents are full of shit when they were hiding behind free speech as the reason they were allowing all this, when we know goddamn well they resorted to that, and tomorrow they will abandon it the first second they don't agree with the cause. That's all I was saying.
Yeah, let me just finish the thought and then we go to Nico, because as I said, once it becomes against a cause, I'm not saying anybody here, but I'm saying it becomes against something that you believe in. Now it becomes all of a sudden, they saying this and it's dangerous and stuff like that. And the second thing, if you are getting your information from social media, Twitter stuff, that's really your problem. You should be able to, I think you should hold certain people in the news or something at a higher level of free speech, because it has to be.
That is where people are getting their problem. People aren't even reading books anymore. There's a whole headline the other day about professors at Columbia said kids don't even want to read whole books anymore.
I did see that.
Yeah, but at the same time, when somebody reacts to something, and I think that's the main thing for free speech to me, especially like it's a lot says like, these kids are doing all this, they don't even understand what's going on. Sometimes you don't have to understand what's going on. If you're reacting to a human nature of some horrible things, then you have a right to express it.
Let's let Nico in. I just want to say, just to encapsulate the whole argument, there are ideologues, and then there are people who are more practical, like Charles Krauthammer once put it, the triumph of experience over hope. And I mean, you guys know better than anybody how much I'm on the side of free speech. I don't even think it can be questioned.
Yep.
But I am worried that the people who are making the argument that it's not working out, it's not enough just to tell them, how dare you say that? They are stacking up evidence of dysfunction in the same way people who believe in capitalism eventually have to be swayed by stacking up evidence that the free market is having bad results. And I feel like, instead of denying it and sweeping it under the rug, we should be talking about it and trying to figure it out, because they don't give a shit. They're happy to weaponize these things as a way to then finally change the First Amendment or its interpretation. If we want to preserve the interpretation, we have to stop pretending, no, everything's fine, it'll all work out. But all these 80-year-olds are dying because they won't take the COVID vaccine. Well, what are you going to do? That's free speech. I said, well, maybe that's not the most important thing, free speech, buddy. That's what I'm afraid is going. So go ahead, Nico.
I do think you put your finger on the problem, right? The saying used to be that a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to put its pants on. In the social media age, you could say it gets halfway around the world before the truth even thinks to put its pants on.
Yeah, I actually have that in my nose, almost not think, but the same kind of thing. Like that, put his pants on is quaint compared to the situation today. Go ahead.
And the marketplace of ideas theory, I do think that truth wins out in the marketplace of ideas over a long enough time horizon. And we've seen that throughout human history. But in the short term, it can definitely lose out, right? And lives can be lost as a result of it. As you just said, I don't think free speech advocates do themselves any favors by trying to make the argument that truth wins out immediately, because I don't think that's the case. But there's two ways to think about truth. There's one, as my colleague Greg Lukianoff calls it, there's the big T truths. It's like, this thing happened, this thing worked, this is what the best science says. But then there's what he calls the small t truth, which is knowing the world as it is. This idea that we can only operate in the world if we know what other people think and what other people believe. And censorship is a way of just eliminating information from your view. That people believe stupid, wrong-headed, and bigoted things is information, right? And it's something that needs to be acted upon. It's particularly if you're in a government, you need to write policy around it, right? Censorship, as Jonathan Rauch, the great author, put it, is like breaking the thermometer. You don't change the temperature. You just don't know what it is anymore, right? And so this is called the pure informational theory of freedom of speech, that freedom of speech is what gives you information in order to operate in the world. If you are Jewish and there's a Nazi in the room, you want to know that there's that Nazi in the room because you want to know not to turn your back to them, right? It's that sort of idea. I think one thing I'd maybe take slight issue with...
And vice versa, by the way, but go ahead.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, right. But I don't know that misinformation, so to speak, or lies, whatever the term of the day is so new. 1912, they tried to pass a law banning photo editing because people were photoshopping themselves, the analog version of photoshopping themselves, next to President William Howard Taft. And they thought misinformation was just going to be ripe and that photo editing was going to totally screw up our conception of the world. And we've gone through anarchic periods with the advent of new technology where we're trying to figure out how to learn to live with them before. Think about the printing press, right? That led to the Reformation, which then led to the 30-Year War, which then led to 8 million dead in Europe. People died, right? Their conception of the truth was gone because the Catholic Church didn't have the monopoly anymore. 8 million people died because of that. But are we better off for having the printing press? Like, I think we probably are. But
of course, you're better off. But if 8 million people start dying in America, the First Amendment is not going to survive.
No, it probably won't. It probably won't. Depends if they blame it on that. Okay, so I think, Noam, you're right. You can accept all of your premises that misinformation is right. People are dying as a result. People are making bad decisions and dying as a result. And still get to the place where you defend free speech, because what is the solution? And is that worse than the disease? Is the medicine worth the disease? I mean, who decides what is misinformation? Many of us read 1984 by George Orwell, where the main character, Winston Smith, literally worked in a ministry of truth for Oceania, where he decided what was true and what was false, and the government had control over that. I don't know that there's any government entity that I would trust to decide what is true and false by pain of punishment. And so I could accept your premise, Noam, but I would never accept the premise that censorship would ever be a solution to it. Now, the problem that civil libertarians often have is that we point out when things are a violation of individual rights. And you can support free speech because you believe in the marketplace of truth or the pure informational theory or the individual rights undergirding it. But when you're defending the individual rights, you're not often also then presenting a solution for the problems that individual rights prevents the government from acting on. So, for example, let's say you're the ACLU and you see due process violations are running rampant in the city of New York, right? Like, you're going to defend those people whose due process rights are violated, but the people in government would say, well, we're violating due process rights, or we're stopping and frisking because we have all these low-level crimes that are making life unlivable here. Is it then incumbent upon the civil libertarians at the ACLU to then posit policies for cracking down on crime, or is it just their job to defend individual rights when those policies might violate them? And I think organizations like FIRE, we're in the individual rights defense game. We're not in the solving media literacy game. Like, that's not what we're good at. But at the same time, it can look to people on the outside like a half measure, right? Like they want the solutions to the problems. They don't just want the defense of the individual rights, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, but I don't know. I don't know if I agree. I don't even know if what I'm saying is even silly or not, because, people panic about things that don't ever pan out. But you're right. I understand what you're saying, that people at Fire don't think they're supposed to be worried about media literacy. But if media illiteracy is the prime threat to the things that you hold dear, then you should be the one to be worrying about it, because the people who don't hold it dear sure ain't going to worry about it. They're going to say, as Biden did, appoint a disinformation czar, right? He got laughed out of public, but that doesn't mean it won't rear its ugly head again. And that's like one of the things, one of the things that annoys people when I kind of say it is that we almost had a completely different Supreme Court. If Hillary had won, we might, and then Biden and then Harris, we might have a 6-3 liberal Supreme Court who might be very open to many of these refinements of free speech, which their constituents, the left of the Democratic Party, where all the energy is, they are chomping at the bit to get their hands on the First Amendment. We know this. We see articles written. There was just an article, one of the things, but maybe it's time to torch the Constitution in a mainstream thing. This can happen.
Yeah. In this counter narrative where Hillary won, might you also, I mean, now we're speculating, but you could also not have the same countercultural anti-Trump heightening of a lot of these feelings towards censorship that you're describing.
Anything's possible.
I was just also going to add that by Nico describing his organization as focusing narrowly, you're also leaving to the marketplace a better chance of somebody who's better equipped for solving that problem to solve that problem.
Well, the problems that you're identifying that justify censorship aren't going to be limited to misinformation. Before this, it was hate speech. Like, is it Fire's job, or is it free speech advocates' job to go out there and solve bigotry in the world? Prior to that, it was national security. Like, is it our job to go out there and solve all the national security crises that might justify censoring a newspaper? I don't know.
No, but let me give you an example. Your job, you don't have a job. You do it. You don't have a job. But
but if it's a threat, if the justifications are a threat to free speech, you could argue that the justifications then need to be addressed by free speech advocates so they never reach censorship.
I think it's practically makes sense. So okay, I think we all agree that, and I had suggested it, by the way, but that this community notes thing on Twitter is a big improvement for Twitter, right? We all agree?
I found it helpful, yeah.
Yeah, and many important things. I know Twitter is definitely not perfect, but this is a major improvement. And
although it's been abused, I've seen it abused where they're like,
yes, definitely,
they're dunks on somebody rather than correction.
Well, all fact checking, as we know, can be unreliable. But it would have been great if the free speech community had been advocating for the community notes. It's also a good diplomatic presentation of a organization. The ACLU got a lot of flack for defending pedophiles and seemingly, but it was a different world then. You could get away with it. But I listen. Things sometimes turn out in funky ways as you try to see around corners and imagine what the threats are of the future. And I think we've all kind of identified and felt for a while now that free speech is not quite the bedrock principle in elite and mainstream America as it was at the time when the ACLU was reliable. The ACLU now can come out and seem to be the enemy of free speech, and that is dangerous. So and that's really just the genesis of my thing. Like, well, how do we protect ourselves when the smart energy is no longer on our side, when the liberal Harvard law graduates are lining up wanting to outlaw hate speech, and they have pull, and they see us as aligning with the rubes and the deplorables, and it may pass, storms pass without actually ever dropping a raindrop. This could pass. It just worries me.
So I'm gonna ask you guys a question, but I want to say one thing before that is no, Noam, I'm not gonna admit it, but he did suggest the community thing in Twitter a long time ago.
I did,
But I
yeah.
never say that because he's gonna make me go back and watch all 5,000 episodes and find that clip.
They did. There was an episode that said, "What would you do to improve Twitter?"
Yeah.
And
And he's gonna literally make me do that, so I'm not gonna approve. But he did say that it could be a good. But again, it's in hand. Imagine if not Elon Musk that owns it, if somebody else. Now, who would be the judge? So since October 7th that happened, all the stuff that happened in college.
Oh, by the way, that's a very good point. Like, imagine my point, and then let's imagine that a private owner like Elon Musk actually wants to put his foot on the throttle of this stuff and starts limiting the true things and really just puts it all in one direction. Now, you could say, well, then it wouldn't work out for him because people would see that as unreliable. And I'd say maybe it would work out that way, because I'm shocked at the numbers, millions and millions and millions of people who seem to be taken in by these things that are going on. I can't believe it, but I can't deny it.
Yep. So since October 7th, everything that happened in colleges, the encampment, all this stuff, and the students doing stuff, people were like,
oh, I said one other thing. One insight also I had. We tend to, I think, assume that the true market is for the truth. And one of the things I've been grappling with when I see what Fox News has become, what MSNBC has become, what various other outlets have become, what Tucker Carlson has become, I'm not so sure people are interested in the truth anymore. I'm not sure that's what the market is.
But the people who are better adapted, right? That's why it's a value in the first place.
Well, what Nico's kind of
adaptive.
I mean, what Nico, I think, would say, and he's right, it was kind of his Gutenberg analogy, is that in the end, the truth will out. But what price will we pay to learn that lesson?
This is almost like the opposite argument for bringing abortion to the states, right? Because a lot of people argue that it, stabilizes the country in the long run, but in the short run, obviously, you have all these individual cases of people suffering.
Yeah,
kind of a similar math.
So I want to go, Nico, with the question, but if somebody, like, say, if Qatar or the United Arab Emirates owns Twitter, now all of a sudden it's going to be, it's not about free speech. Look who owns it, Well,
so, this is to Noam's point, right? Is some people might want to seek out a Qatari Twitter, right? So there are some people, and actually Nature did a study of misinformation in June of this year, where it found that the people who are reading this sort of crazy blogs that are on the internet are concentrated, and this is me quoting them, among a narrow fringe with strong motivations to seek out such information.
Yeah.
The average U.S. internet user spends less than 10 minutes a day consuming news online. And according to this survey, misinformation represents 0.15% of the American media diet. So it's the horseshoe theory of politics. I mean, you got people on the polls who are trying to seek out this information that confirms their priors and then just amplifies their priors. And that's how you end up with a gunman at Comet Ping Pong in Washington, D.C. looking for the QAnon satanic pedophile ring in the basement, right? Like your average news reader isn't going to be that person, but
because it became like I said that before. It's you used to do your research, then make your opinion. Now you make your opinion, then look for somebody who's going to support him, and you're going to find it. So
two things. So then why is it that like half the Republican Party thinks the vaccine is dangerous? Like what went wrong there? I mean, it's not dangerous, right?
Well, this is the other thing about free speech too, Noam, that I think is underappreciated, which is like, free speech is a mechanism to ensure trust, right? So let's think about our criminal justice system. Someone is convicted of a crime, and to the extent the person is convicted at the outcome of that trial, and people accept that conviction, it'll probably depend in part as to whether they thought the trial was fair, right? And that's why you have due process protections, that they preserve the likelihood that the outcome is correct. I think what some people saw during COVID is that there was censorship on social media, that there were authority figures in government and in private enterprise that were putting the thumb on the scale of debate. And some of the things that they said needed to be censored ended up being true, or at least contestable.
Many of them,
many of them, right? Yeah. So then people lose faith in the institutions and they lose faith in the process. Now, I can't posit an ulterior universe where you didn't have the tech companies labeling, demoting, taking down posts arguing for the lab leak, for example. I can't posit a scenario where the politicians aren't out there telling the private companies they have to censor or limiting speech on this, that, or the other topic. But I have to imagine that the trust in the science wouldn't have deteriorated as much because the process to arrive at the conclusions for the science would have been fair and open and debated. So there's that.
I agree with you. And by the way, when I say the vaccine is not dangerous, I'm not denying that there's not complications with the vaccine, and that even, this goes to your point, that there was always a certain subset of people who didn't need to take the vaccine or could at least contemplate that maybe the risks could be, imagined one way or another. But obviously people over a certain age obviously had to take the vaccine. Many of them listened to Tucker Carlson and dropped dead. Something went wrong.
But also to that point, because of, I have major health problems, the doctors would be very honest with me. They were like, no, you're not taking the second dose until we get more studies, which I found that this information was not shared with public in a lot of ways, is like, oh, it's safe, versus people would say like, oh, maybe there's some stuff,
No, just to put a fine point on it, Nico is 100,000% correct. And what he's doing is giving us a glimpse of that the cure is worse than disease. Like, well, you think you want to flirt with censorship? Look how that turns out. I agree with it. Don't ever think I don't agree with you. I agree with you. What I'm saying is that I want to make sure that the mainstream influential people in America see that and continue to see it, and don't decide that, this is not working out, because as I hear them and read them and see them tweet, it's not, when I was a kid, 100% of people I went to law school with were First Amendment fanatics. They wanted executions on TV because we should see, like, there was literally everybody, I shouldn't say 100%, but I don't remember anybody otherwise. Everybody believed really in their blood that free speech was the most profound value and was the most important thing in America. That's not the case anymore.
Let's get you to disagree with Nico now. Let's talk about the colleges. I'm curious to know your thoughts. When all this happened after October 7th, and we saw all the demonstration and camp and stuff, some people will be like, oh, free speech. And then it's like, oh, that's hate speech. That's this, is this. Where you stand, Nico, with all this since started? What's your thoughts on that?
I sent an email to fire staff the day after October 7th, or maybe it was 2 days because October 7th was a Saturday. I might have sent it on a Sunday, though, saying things are going to get hot because in our experience, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is where tensions are the highest on campus. College students really care about this conflict. They have strong opinions and they are strongly held. So we knew it was going to get hot. The problem and challenge for fire through the last year has been that you have a intermingling of protected speech. We're talking about public college and university campuses that are bound by the First Amendment. Private campuses can promise free speech rights, but they don't have to grant free speech rights. But you have an intermingling of protected expression with unprotected conduct. So, for example, protests carrying signs on public areas of campus that do not disrupt the operations of that campus should be fully protected regardless of the content or viewpoint of the speech. Now, blocking Jewish students from accessing portions of the campus, not constitutionally protected. In certain cases, encampments that are overnight and indefinite. Colleges and universities can have content neutral time, place, and manner restrictions on that. And we saw one of the reasons why many colleges do unfold at UCLA, where they didn't have enough security to police the encampment overnight, and it turned into a melee between protesters and counter-protesters, sending some folks to the hospital. But at the same time, you also have students who are occupying buildings saying that's their free expression right. You don't have the right to occupy a private building or even a public building. But you also see, for example, Congress try and pass a definition of anti-Semitism, which would codify a definition that clearly infringes on free expression rights. Like comparing the state of Israel to Nazism, like that might be abhorrent. You might hate that. It's maybe stupid, but it's constitutionally protected speech. And the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition says that that is an example of anti-Semitism. And that would be the first. Go ahead.
We can cut that part out. I wanted.
What about Free Palestine?
I want to say something about the campuses, because I struggle with this, and this also pertains to the recent Amy Wax scandal. Amy Wax, University of Pennsylvania law professor, who got somehow punished. Nico would know the details for.
Oh, it's a long saga. I knew you were going to go there too, because you went to Penn Law, right? No.
Yeah, but I didn't know her, but I met her since, and she's very blunt. But anyway. If I'm in charge of a college, it's not just about the right to protest and speech and all that. You're also running a community, and I struggle with this at my own business. You're running a community that has other priorities besides whatever you want to call this, the protest and expression. They want a campus which has a pleasant, filial, is that the word? Like a brotherly, pleasant atmosphere where students enjoy each other and have a hospitable vibe and relationship. And it can't be denied that what's going on at the campuses, regardless of which side of the issue you're on, does impinge on the university's mission, which is not simply about information and ones and zeros. It's also about the overall experience of taking 1,000 kids and having them live together and room together and eat together and play together and sit for 4 years. And this has been a knife to the throat of that. And it would be dishonest of me to pretend otherwise. And I don't know what the answer would be. I had thought that one answer would be, you know what? No protests on campus. I said, there's a gate there. Go on the other side of the gate. Once you get there, you're a citizen of the United States of America, and you protest to your heart's delight. But we don't need this here. So, well, yeah, but for you didn't mind when they were protesting against, emission standards for whatever. Yeah, that's true. But again, it's different between an ideologue and looking at some practical reality. But that was different. That people could be on opposite sides of EPA regulations and still hang out and play ball, and hacky sack on the quad. This has become so volatile that a house divided can't stand. And I don't know how you translate that into doctrine, or jurisprudence. But I can't deny it's true. And the same thing with Amy Wax. She was so outspoken, and the way she put things on matters of race, which didn't actually even pertain to the subject matter of the class, that I can't deny that if I were black, I wouldn't want to have to sit in fucking Amy Wax's class. Like, I'm not going to pretend otherwise. And that if the university doesn't actually have a problem on their hands, when they have to put this woman who spoke this way about black people in a classroom with black people in it, of course, they're not making that problem up. They're just not.
That's one thing that the Penn did in 2018 after those comments is they removed her mandatory first-year class.
Yeah,
that might be a narrow way to approach it, and then anyone who's in her class is voluntarily taking her class. Yeah. But your point's well taken, Noam. I think you have to accept that there are certain conflicts and certain issues that are just going to divide the campus, whether it's civil rights or the Vietnam War, right? I mean, campuses have been hotbeds of dissent and disruption throughout American history. The question then becomes, what do you do about it? Do you try and pretend that dissent isn't there and then kind of excise it from college campuses? That's what prompted the Berkeley free speech movement, is you had Jack Weinberg tabling on behalf of CORE, which was the Congress on Racial Equality, a student group on campus, and Berkeley had said no protest, no political activity on campus, which then
I don't know. Did Vietnam divide the students like that? And I think Vietnam might have been pretty unanimous.
Yeah, you might be right about students,
that. I don't ever recall anything like this.
But so I asked you about the term or carrying the flag, either Palestinian or Israeli, or saying free Palestine. Is that term free speech or not? Because some people, I remember Noam a couple of times, like, what do you mean by that when you say it? But do you have the isn't it free speech just to say it? Do you have to explain what it says? And by the way, we had an episode with Amy Wax that Noam did not want to release. Maybe
Yeah, we did it. We had Amy Wax on the show, and this is years ago, and the way she spoke was just so blunt. To protect her, I didn't run the episode. I just said, I'm not going to subject this woman to, if people get a hold of this. I mean, if
that's got to be a lot coming from you too, Noam, because you are usually free for all, let anyone say what they want, and I will have it.
It was too much. It was, and by the way, it was the mirror image in a way of what Hatem was referring to, like, but this river to the sea, I was saying for a long time. Well, listen, we're on a different issue. Let's not get started, because it's not actually a free speech issue. They can say whatever they want.
No, it is a free speech issue, because that's what they went after the college presidents in December for.
I'm saying what I was going to say to criticize them is not to criticize their right to free speech. Oh, okay. In an environment of free speech, they have every right to say from river to the sea. I would never say otherwise. I was criticizing them as a matter of decency when they were using terms like globalize the intifada, and then pretending and hiding behind that ambiguity, when the only use of intifada that any of us have ever heard has been in the context of violence. When Mahmoud Abbas threatens Israel, there might be another intifada. If you know that, we know what he means. He means you're going to blow up, your children get blown up. So when they say globalize the intifada, I'm like, why would you dig in on a term? If you mean nonviolent protest all over the world, then have your slogan be about nonviolent protests all over the world. But if you are digging in on globalize the intifada, then I'm calling bullshit. You want people to not know what you're talking about. When you say river to the sea, and you know the history of this term, now maybe in October you didn't know, in November you didn't know, but by January, everybody now knew the origin of river to the sea and how it had been used and what it meant to people. So at that point, you could say, you know what? And even Norman Finkelstein made the same point. Change the slogan to 2 states for 2 people. If you mean 2 states for 2 people, no, we're not going to say 2 states. We want to say river to the sea.
Yeah,
what do
he
you
got
mean by
booed
that?
for that, didn't he?
Yeah, he did get booed. What do you mean? What do you mean by river to the sea? We don't have to tell you what we mean. That offends me. But of course, they have a right to do it. I never said they have a right to do it.
It's also the ideological inconsistency when it comes from the same people whose like whole focus on like microaggressions or
dog whistles.
Language in general. Well, just deferring to a person who tells you what it means to them, if you're referring to their ethnicity or domain.
Yeah. But also, it's a term that used by if it's the majority of people saying something like intifada or whatever, and they mean something, that shouldn't be considered hate speech, because we don't know what everybody means. Yeah, maybe
there is no such thing as hate speech, actually.
Right, that just doesn't matter for.
Yeah.
I mean, we can all have our own opinions on what speech is hateful, but as an exception to free speech protections, at least in the United States, much to Tim Walz's chagrin in that VP debate.
How could the governor of Minnesota still say something like that?
But Nico, so what is your thought? Did you feel that the students should, is that protected? Is that free speech to do demonstration or protest inside the colleges if they don't take over building? Obviously, if they don't stop Jewish students from going, like all these incidents, if it wasn't for that, the rest of the stuff is that?
Yes, as a general principle, I think yes.
Okay. All right, so let's go to a little bit of the Tim Walz that we talked about hate speech.
Well, he said 2 things that were interesting, right? One was that hate speech isn't free speech, and the other that you can't shout or yell, I think was his word, fire in a crowded theater. On the first point, he's just wrong. Hate speech is not an exception to the First Amendment. Going back to that Skokie case that made its way up to the Supreme Court, onto the flag burning cases in 1989, where the Supreme Court held that you can burn a flag, and the majority opinion said if there's any bedrock principle of the First Amendment, it's that the government cannot prohibit the expression of an idea because society finds it offensive or disagreeable. On to the Westboro Baptist Church, right, where they were permitted under the First Amendment to have a sign outside the funeral of dead soldiers that said God hates fags. And then you had the case in 2017, Matal v. Tam, involving the slants. It's a ban of Asian members who were trying to reappropriate the term slants.
On the Westboro Church, Was that a unanimous decision?
Snyder v. Phelps. I'm not.
I thought burning a flag is a crime.
No.
It's
It
not?
is if you steal someone else's flag or you burn it in a place where you can't burn something. But no, just the expression through the burning of flag. It's not here. Let's see what they say about.
No, but I mean literally burning a flag. You know, we saw some stuff like they're burning flags. That's
you can't burn a flag if you're not allowed to burn things, but you can burn it. The flag has no special protection.
Yeah, the
If
Snyder
you
v.
buy
Phelps
a
was
flag,
8-1.
you can burn it in your yard.
It was 8-1.
Yeah, it was with Alito in the dissent.
Alito. So that's interesting.
Yeah, so you have Scalia even, and Scalia was in the majority in the flag burning case too. So conservative, the paradigmatic conservative justice is on the side of and the liberal justices too on the side of here of.
So Nico, for you, Trump or Kamala is better for free speech coming up?
We're actually putting together a sort of dossier on both of them on free speech. And this is what you get with politicians. They're just entirely inconsistent. Often they'll say the right thing when they're talking in platitudes and generalities. But then you get Trump, who says that anyone who burns the flag should spend a year in jail and have their citizenship revoked. Or you get Tim Walz, who says that hate speech isn't protected and that misinformation isn't protected speech. Or you have Kamala Harris, who is trying to get conservative foundations to turn over their donor lists in the Americans for Prosperity v. Becerra case when she was the attorney general, or telling crisis pregnancy centers that they had to tell their patients where they can get an abortion, which was the NIFLA v. Becerra case. So like, you know, they're just not great on free expression across the board. And then you have this weird scenario where
which one, in your opinion, is going to destroy the free speech more?
Oh, you can't. First of all, FIRE is nonpartisan, so we would never say this or that candidate. And I think our 501c3 status precludes us from doing it. But one thing I am disappointed about is also the efforts to revoke Section 230, which is the liability protection that private platforms have and was established in the 1990s for third-party content. Conservatives are all about big tech censorship, but you want big tech censorship? Remove their third-party liability protection. They're going to just be censoring everyone else because they're going to be at risk of lawsuits for anything anyone says on their platforms. So it's a whole mess there. And then Tim Walz gave the shouting fire analogy, which is just a headbanger for free speech advocates. I can get into that if you want. But
Noam, which one?
Well, you know, my father always had trouble with flag burning. I finally persuaded him. I told you this already, or you're...
No, it doesn't surprise me.
No,
People who are otherwise
with
good on free speech are weird with flag burning and profanity.
Yeah.
So profanity he loved, but and I convinced him that, you know, with certain ways, you know, analogies, or, you know, that, well, burning a flag should be protected, but
you used the Palestinian flag.
yeah, exactly. Very good. But from his generation, his as an immigrant growing up when it wasn't permitted, he couldn't process that, and yet he was completely open and understood in his gut the notion that in a debate of ideas, it had to be no holds barred. So I don't support banning flag burning, and I would also say that among the things that candidates say that could actually come to be, Trump has zero chance of actually implementing a law against flag burning. I think he's just telegraphing a certain cultural point of view to his voters. But the actual, in my opinion, the side that actually could succeed in narrowing free speech would be only on the left. Just like, you know, we had laws about in New York, I don't know if they were struck down, that you were going to get fined for misgendering people, and like it was all kinds of crazy stuff, you know.
Yeah, we looked into challenging that.
Did it get stricken on its own, or?
Well, I don't think there's been a lawsuit challenging it. It's hard to find someone withstanding for a challenge because I don't think it's actually been applied to anyone. I think it's on the books, but it hasn't. If you know anyone who's been fined for this, please send them our way.
Yeah, it just normalizes and the slippery slope is real. It softens the ground for thinking about the world in a different way. You know?
Yeah. Well, he also used that shouting fire in a crowded theater analogy.
Oh yeah, say that.
Well,
Right.
in principle, it's correct, right? And Boris knows it. Like if
Falsely.
there is, yeah, if there is a fire in a crowded theater, you better shout fire because you should let people know to get out. But if there's not, I mean, when Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the opinion in the case that used that, I think he was making an allusion to something that happened in 1913 called the Italian Hall Incident, where in Calumet, Michigan, you had union workers celebrating a Christmas party, and someone falsely shouted fire in the theater and caused a panic, and 73 people died. Like, it can be unprotected in certain circumstances. But the case that phrase originated from was a case where Philadelphia socialists, Charles Schenck and Elizabeth Baer, handed out 15,000 pamphlets opposing the draft during World War I. And they were sent to jail and convicted under the Espionage Act of 1917. And Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes compared their handing out leaflets opposing the Selective Services Act, which the call to action at the end was come to our headquarters on Arch Street and sign a petition to revoke the Selective Services Act. He compared that action to falsely shouting fire in a crowded theater and causing a panic. And in the years since, it's just become a reflex for people trying to justify whatever they want to censor to say, it's akin to shouting fire in a crowded theater and causing a panic. And you saw Tim Walz during that debate have that almost immediate reflex to shouting fire in a crowded theater. So free speech advocates roll their eyes at that because they know where the phrase originates from. And the people who use it often also forget, as Walz did, that falsely needs to be a part of it. So,
yeah, well, I mean, to be fair, I've heard people make that correction. I think everybody understands it means falsely. Nobody thinks that you can't actually yell fire when there's a fire.
But how often, Noam, do you hear people make that argument or use that line in cases where we're talking about protected speech, whether it's hate speech or in this case misinformation? I mean, it's often used as just like a reflexive justification for whatever speech you want to be banned.
It's a hyperbole for just this will lead to catastrophe.
To be perfectly honest, I've seen this stuff for years. It always comes up, and the people on my side, they always make a big point of telling people why this is a bad example, but it's never really packed a wallop with me because it is in its own way a simplistic way of demonstrating to somebody that it's not just about speech. Obviously, you can't yell speech if it's going to cause a panic and it's on a lie. So you have to take a close. So there has to be a process where you look at what's said and what the imminent consequences might be. And I think that is in some way, the legal test. I should know, but imminent assured consequences of violence or panic, whatever it is. These are the areas where you can get in trouble for saying anything, right?
Yeah, that's the Brandenburg test.
Incitement.
It's a fair enough point. No, I think you're right. That's a fair enough point.
Nico, your company.
By the way, Oliver Wendell Holmes, if I recall, also had said he was in favor of sterilization. He said that 3 generations of idiots is enough. So, he was one of our best justices, but he had his moments.
Yeah, Buck v. Bell was that case. Yeah, that was definitely his life story is incredible. Like, he was shot twice during the Civil War, and he actually met John Stuart Mill when he was traveling in Europe. He's kind of an interesting character.
And later on, he became somewhat of a free speech voter, right? Like I think he switched sides in some way.
Well, yeah, actually. So you have that decision in the Schenck case where the socialists were sent to jail. And then that summer, he got connected with his friend Harold Lasky and this Harvard law professor, Zachariah Chafee, who essentially changed his mind on freedom of expression, reminded him of John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. And in November of that year, a case came before the Supreme Court involving socialists in New York who threw a bunch of leaflets, again, out of a window advocating for a general strike. This is a case Abrams v. United States. And Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the dissent in that case, almost the same facts, and made the marketplace of our ideas argument some of the most glowing language that we have in our First Amendment jurisprudence. And him and Louis Brandeis, for the next 20 some odd years, were the lone men on the court making the argument for free expression until you get to 1931 when this court starts to agree with them and they start to win some First Amendment decisions. So yeah, there's a great book called The Great Dissent, which is about Oliver Wendell Holmes's dissent in that case and how he changed his mind that summer on freedom of speech. So yeah, you're 100% right there.
Brandon, I can't wait. In the frank expression of conflicting opinion lies the greatest promise of wisdom. Louis Brandeis.
Yes, yeah, his Whitney v. California dissent.
So
1925 was great.
To end on a good note, I'm going to ask you the last question, but before that, we're going to talk about. But the last question will be: do you think about the freedom of free speech? You think we're heading the right way or the wrong way? But before that, your company is providing a legal representation for a professor who recently was fired for doing porn on the side. That's a fun story.
He had a porn side gig, right? So he was the chancellor of the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse and also a tenured professor. And he and his wife had this OnlyFans channel, I believe it was OnlyFans.
Like we all do.
Yeah, like we all do, right? Where he and his wife would, I think it was called Sexy Happy Couple, where they would cook vegan meals and then have sex on camera. And this was done anonymously until it was not, right? And then folks found out about it, and he got fired from his job as a chancellor. And then most recently, he was brought up and to have his tenure revoked. Now, fire didn't get involved in the chancellorship deal because you're publicly representing the university. You're a spokesperson for the university, and so they probably had the right to do that. But on the other hand, a tenured professor who just teaches class doesn't do the porn in his class, right? And isn't really talking about it in his class. Who just has this side hobby of doing porn with his wife in a very wholesome way, maybe you put it, cook vegan food. Should they lose their job for that? And porn is protected by the First Amendment. 60% of Americans watch porn. Can
you argue the same way as Amy Wax that the relationship in order to be able to productively do the job has been altered due to the fact that the students can watch their teacher fucking?
Well, where does that end, right? So, I mean, I'm happy to go into a college or university environment where I have quirky professors who do all sorts of weird things, right? I think that makes life more interesting. But you could see that rationale being applied to the political science professor who's a member of the NRA and has a YouTube channel where he talks about guns, right? Mm-hmm. Or where does it end, right? There are so many different things that offend people that can compromise their relationships with their professors that I think it's a slippery slope. And once you start applying it, and granted, I know porn is weird for people. Porn is definitely weird for people. At the same time, most Americans watch porn. And I don't know that they should lose their jobs for participating in it so long as it isn't brought into the classroom.
So is it a First Amendment issue then, or can schools choose how they treat these things? And you'll get a marketplace of schools, and some people might want to go to a school where they got quirky professors who do porn, and others might want to go to a school that, any professor doing something that interferes or, no, I don't want to defend it, but some people might choose whatever that is.
Well, there are some weird kind of intersections here is public and private schools, right? Private schools can do whatever they want. But to the extent they have policies that protect certain things, they need to abide by it. There needs to be truth in advertising. And there's some professors who won contract claims on those grounds. But beyond that, you're talking about a public college or university bound by the First Amendment. There are restrictions on what colleges and universities can do there, so they don't put in place the pull of orthodoxy. But then there's this added layer of protection when you receive tenure as well, which is supposed to insulate your job from punishment for things that you say that are consistent with the First Amendment outside of class. Tenure is not going to protect you if you're a biology professor talking about how the Holocaust was fake in every class. Like the things that you discuss in your class need to be germane to the class. But outside of the classroom, if you're engaged in just the political process or in protected speech or have hobbies or say things that are protected, not a violation of the law, then generally tenure protects faculty members' rights to do that, as I think it should.
OnlyFans caused a lot of problems, though. It's like recently a nurse was fired as well for doing OnlyFans. I want to live in a world where OnlyFans fire people for being a nurse. It's the other way around. That's how it should be.
Well, I was reading recently that OnlyFans doesn't have a lot of shareholders, and it's just a cash cow.
Yeah.
And porn, I think, throughout the past couple of decades has been a driver of tech and innovation, right? Like credit card industry took off in part for people who wanted to access porn. I think there's actually even a movie about that.
So last question.
Oh, I have a free speech issue for you.
Go.
Oh boy.
No, I don't know what's behind it. So there's this white supremacist website called Countercurrents. Is that what it's called? something like that. And yeah, somehow I found myself on it. No, I was doing
Watched a couple YouTube videos.
I was doing some research.
Donated
and,
some money.
There was an interview on it. But so in the interview it referenced blog posts, like message posts, and it's behind a paywall. So I wanted to join the site. I sound like Pete Townsend explaining why I was looking at. So I wanted to in order to get access to the posts that they were referring to, right? And you could not pay for it with a credit card. You had to give it your bank, your routing number, your account number, what all it is, which I presume to be that the credit card companies didn't want their business.
It got debanked. Yeah.
It's a private company, obviously, but it's just, it was interesting, and it is a white supremacist website, but I would not say that what I read on it was something that was not interesting and was actually pretty good. It wasn't like a fire
made a lot of good points.
No, well, it was interesting. All I can say is interesting. It wasn't like the davidduke.com, like it was scholarly in its own way. Listen, I hate them. They're like Nazis, right? But it was interesting, and it bothered me that I couldn't just put my credit card down and read the thing,
Well, there are 2 points I want to make about that.
Yeah.
The first is just a credit to you, Noam. And other people have said this, so I'm not breaking any ground here. You're just such an intensely curious person that you want to understand what the other side thinks, even if they're white supremacists. Like, you're going to go and part with your money in order to access this lengthy article to read about what this white supremacist thinks about the issue, because you have the opposite of what many people on campus have: strong opinions, loosely held. Like, you want to know where you're wrong. So that's totally a credit to you, and a reason why your
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
The other day he bought me a pager so he can get to me.
I want to know where you are. Go ahead.
And the other one is that there is a big debate in free speech community about internet infrastructure, or just economic infrastructure. Things like the ISPs, like the Verizon and the AT&T, that allow you to get on the internet. Things like credit card companies or banks or the telephone company. These are things that are infrastructure that aren't really ideological. And whether it could be consistent with the First Amendment for the government to say they must remain non-ideological and be a public accommodation, more or less, like a utility that needs to be available to all.
Well, in car insurance, very often the government will set up a private assigned risk pool for people who can't get insurance because their driving records are so bad. And there's I forget how it works, but it's some outside. It's through government mandate, and I guess all the insurance companies share it. I don't know, but that's what it is for people who can't get car insurance. There's an assigned risk pool because everybody needs to be able to drive and everybody needs insurance. So it's kind of like that. Like, nobody wants to take their credit card business. We set up a white supremacist.
Yeah, it would be the bank that has all the white supremacist websites, all the porn websites, and all the weed websites.
I mean, look, it's kind of related to the stuff I started out by saying. There used to be only
crypto.
No, there used to be only currency, so it wasn't an issue. So and currency was public. Now nobody uses currency anymore. So you have privatization of the means of commerce. And you know what? We didn't think about that when we wrote the Constitution. And now people, because of their views, are not able to partake in commerce as other people can. Well, that's not right? That's not what we want. So now the government needs to step in some way. I agree they should. I think they should.
Well, it depends. It depends on the nature of the institution. For example, if you're a cake baker and
a what?
A cake baker. I'm talking about the Supreme Court cases, right? Involving
gay cake.
Yeah, and you don't want to bake a cake for a gay wedding, and should you not be allowed to do that? I mean, should.
I think we've decided that even Andrew Sullivan, our mutual friend, agrees that she will do that. But commerce, this is a fundamental part of the Constitution. Interstate commerce and currency is becoming obsolete. My kids don't even know them, quarter and a nickel. It's crazy,
Well, at a certain point, we'll all be on Bitcoin or Ethereum, right? And we're not going to have to worry about this problem because it's decent. I just did a podcast with a bunch of crypto guys.
I'm skeptical of that. By the way, I should, before we get, I have to apologize publicly to Nico because 2 times in the last couple of years, I screwed him over. As I got older, I think as my inability, it's just normal to remember all the little details of my life increased, and my busyness increased, and then my proximity to the city increased. I began to miss very rarely certain appointments and stuff like that. And so 2 times to Nico, he's the only person to have I didn't show up to a fire event, which was really, that's the most unforgivable one. And then
we were giving him an award too, and he just didn't know it.
Then I was supposed to meet him at the Olive Tree, and that was more, without going into, that was more understandable if you were in my shoes. But the fire thing was, so I really feel every time I see his name, I feel like a schmuck.
Well, you did invite me to this award that you're getting next month, and I do think I'll be able to come. I know I.
Oh, that would be great.
Response on that.
You know all those guys. You'd be like a VIP there.
Are you going to the Free Press thing next week? The debate.
Yes, at the Symphony Space.
Yeah, I think it's at the Symphony. So I'll see you there too.
Yeah, I plan to go to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Well, this was very delightful. Free speech. Are we going the right way? Or...
Yeah.
I think we decided we're not. Right.
Oh, I disagree. I think we're going the right way. I think all this stuff, we're going to develop a herd immunity, whatever that means, to a lot of these issues with time. And I think I already see it happening with the younger generation.
Nico, how old are your child? You're two now or one?
I have 2 kids.
2.
3.
How old?
3 and 1.
Okay.
And we'll hopefully, I mean, the wife and I hopefully will be able to have at least one more. On a lot of kids. We need to get the birth rate up here.
When they hit like TikTok age, and you see the flood of stuff that you can't protect them from.
You can though, Noam.
No, you can't.
You can take a phone away from your kid.
You know what? Let's speak about this when your kids are 10 years old. Okay? Yes, in theory you can.
Well, let's just unpack this for a second. I mean, we can stop the recording if you want. It's like, okay, so when you're in school for a certain amount of time, right? And the schools can regulate. And then outside of that, they're at home where you can control access to what's on the internet or whether they have a phone. Like most kids are in supervised environments for most of the day, and you can't just get a cell phone on your own. You need a credit check in order to get data plan. And so like, I know the pressure is very hard, and I'm probably you're gonna play this back for me in 10 years.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna laugh.
I'm already notating.
Easier to said than done. My kids don't have phones, but
listen, phones are dangerous. Walkie-talkies are,
everything is a network effect, and if the community, all the parents, we try to do this with like my daughter's parents, like let's all agree that between these hours we're gonna take their phone. You try. We no plan survives contact with the enemy with these kids, because the same device that they use to do their homework that the school gives them can also be used to find a way to get access to things that we don't want them to be seeing. I mean, it was tough enough to keep us kids, and no parent succeeded, from seeing Playboy magazines, right? You cannot keep them away from the internet. Their entire social life exists on it. The kid that's not on it is ostracized. It's hard. They're barraged by it. My kids don't even have computers in their room. Everything they do is in front of us. But sometimes somebody will say something very adult, and I'll see the corner of my daughter's mouth go up, and I realize she's getting it. Like somehow she understands this disgusting idea of a man having sex with a donkey. I don't know where she got it from, but she got it. she knows what they were talking about. And the political stuff, it's really hard, and parents want protection. John Haidt is doing fantastic work, and he's being influential, and actually he's kind of doing in a certain way, what I'm saying. He's a free speech guy, and here he is trying to limit. He's not trying to limit the content so much, but he's trying to limit the damage that the unfettered speech is causing in his own way. So good for him.
But through like individual
and he's successful.
decisions.
What's that?
through influencing individual decisions and empowering people mostly
and
to
and
make better decisions for themselves.
and making people aware of the problem. God bless John Haidt. He's an I mean, people know who he is, but this man has been very influential in a lot of ways in the last 10 or 15 years.
He's probably the most influential public person right now, public intellectual right now, at least this year, with everything that he's accomplishing with the reforms in schools. Now, FIRE doesn't agree with everything. We agree with most. I mean, most of what he's advocating for is voluntary, but we have some disagreements surrounding the mandatory age verification that he wants implemented.
Yeah.
But
What's
yeah, he's
the
super
age
influential.
he wants to implement?
But sorry, go ahead.
Well, he believes that websites, social media companies, porn websites should have mandatory age verification to prevent people under a certain age, I believe 13, from accessing them. And that's good in theory, but in practice, that means you need to submit your government ID regardless of what age you are to prove what age you are in order to access certain websites. And I don't know that I want a government database knowing that I went to this or that porn site, right? And he says, well, they'll just eliminate it right after it verifies. But then how do you actually enforce the age verification if the ledger of the verifications is eliminated, right? So like, what is the law? So it's I think there are privacy implications.
The answer is porn should be free.
Yeah.
This is just verification. Listen, I had similar thoughts, but I have such respect for John, and I assume that he has spent real time thinking about this stuff and thinking it through, that my jury is out, and I
no, he's a smart guy. Very thoughtful.
So it's not like he's going to say, "Oh, I never thought of that." Like, I'm sure he's given it thought, and I know he's pulling in the same direction that I would be pulling in. So I give him more latitude than if Hatem said it.
I like they say pulling and porn at the same time, pulling out and.
All
right.
You're never going to be able to pull out of this conversation.
Free speech all the way, and like we say in the Middle East. Free speech, but we cannot guarantee your freedom after the speech.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you so much, Nico, Boris, and everybody. Have a great night. Follow
Thanks, guys.